October 2019. I remember just at night being in tears because all I wanted to do was like play the game, and there's like 27 people online, and since it's a skill-based matchmaking game, it, you, the system like tries to find a fair match for you, and it'll wait if it can't. And I just waited for like 20 minutes, and like it couldn't match me with anybody, and I was like, I guess maybe this is it.
Welcome to Faith Forms. I'm your host, Brock Henderson, and I am really excited about my guest today. Brent Batas is the founder and CEO of AutoAttack Games, which was recently acquired by NinjaKiwi. Him and I have been in the same circles for a number of years through Amladris, but we've never actually got to sit down and talk, so I'm super excited to get to talk with him. At AutoAttack Games, he's the lead designer and lead programmer for Legion TD and Legion TD2, which has sold over 500,000 units on Steam. And in 2020, he made Forbes 30 under 30 list. So Brent, welcome to Faith Forms.
Thanks, Brock. It's great to be here.
So let's jump into the exciting news. You were acquired by NinjaKiwi. How cool is that?
Yeah, so that's been awesome. It was in the works for a little while. We were connected by a mutual friend, and both of us just really hit it off in terms of how we approach games. We weren't talking business at all. It was just a connection of like, hey, you guys think alike, and you both make tower defenses. You guys should meet. And then so before we were talking about things like the language we use in patch notes, or like how we do community management, or like some intricacies of game balance, and like business was pretty far from our minds. And then after our initial meeting, we both kind of came back and be like, why can't we work together with these guys? Like even if we're working on different products. So yeah, I forget if it was us or them who followed up first, but then we just kept the conversation going. And yeah, one thing led to another, and took a little while to figure out what kind of partnership made sense, and ultimately we landed on acquisition as kind of like the thing that made the most sense for everybody. So I'm super stoked. They're like just really awesome people. Like they have the CEO of the company, right, of like an 80-person company, and he's like pretty hands-on with like the patch notes. So it's a very kind of like they're deep in their craft, and it's not like a CEO guy meddling in people on the ground thing. It's like he actually plays the game enough and has he's straight up a gamer like us, and that's kind of a really cool environment to be in. We also, I think, hit it off in terms of how we approach like work-life balance, which is really important to me, and just so many other things. So yeah, we visited them last fall, and then just signed earlier this month, actually. So super
that is so cool. Yeah. Is that kind of out of nowhere for you a little bit? Like the impression I get when I've heard you kind of talk about it briefly is that you've been on your own for a number of years and you're an entrepreneur. Did you ever think you would do a deal like this?
I think for so many years in development, it was just thinking about the next step. Like, how can we make the game even just work? Like, how can we actually make something we can play? And then it was like, how can we make a game that someone will actually pay money for? And then it was like, how can we make a game that like doesn't crash for half the people that try to play? So it was just so many years of like asking, like, how can we even just make it to the next step? And we had so much doubt at every step of the way. Like, can we even like make the next step? It wasn't something like acquisition wasn't on my mind for a long time until fairly recently. I probably first started thinking about it maybe in 2022 after full releasing Legion TD2, just in terms of like, what do we do next? And it was kind of in an awkward position where we love Legion TD2, we love the community it has, and we've worked really hard to build that up. I think financially, like if you just looked at the numbers, the like quote unquote smart thing for me to do would have just been to like just let the game go and move on to something else and just kind of let it be passive income. but none of us even considered that. We're like, we love this game so much, we love the community, we want to keep working on it. But it kind of put us in an awkward position where it's like we're trying to do what's best for kind of the business and keep things sustainable, but also want to do what we love. And then we started thinking like how to make that happen. We like consulted some friends, and like we kind of floated the idea of raising like investment money, but like didn't kind of hit it off in the same way with investors as we did with the NinjaKiwi guys. And I mean, still definitely possible futures there for the future, but it was we were just exploring a lot of different options out there for partly why it took so long. But yeah, I mean, it's such a long journey though. Again, I started Legion TD2 in 2014. I made the original Legion TD mods back in high school in 2009. So it was just, many years of like, all I want to do is just make this game. And it's really cool now being in a position where I kind of know what I want. Like I'm kind of locked into making the new game with NinjaKiwi. Whereas before it was like, there were just so many unknowns, like, can we even do this? And now I feel like I'm going to hit my stride and kind of be able to do what I love, but have a little bit more job security and kind of security for the future.
That's the dream, isn't it?
It is. It was honestly though, if you told me how much work it would be at the start, I still probably wouldn't have done it. It was like there were a lot of tears and a lot of struggles along the way, and I would have been scared off. Like if you showed 24-year-old me just how much work is involved.
Yeah, I think all of us would. Game development and running your own studio is just so much work. It's that naive optimism is what actually kind of helps enable it to actually happen.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to high school. So you were making your original mod was when you were in high school, you said?
So Legion TD, the Warcraft mod. Yep. And I made a bunch of Warcraft mods before that, but none of them kind of took off in the same way. So I started in like 2003, actually. I was 2003. Yeah. Right around maybe a year after Warcraft came out. I started making all these mods. It was such a cool creative outlet. And like, I still miss those days a lot of the times where it's just so pure when you can just make games kind of for the love of it and not worry about can this provide a living for me. And it just feels like that's sort of my dream retirement, is just like be able to make games without any kind of worry about monetization.
So before you were making the mods, were you learning how to program and stuff, or was it just your love of the games that actually kind of drove you to just start taking the first steps?
It was pretty much modding that got me into programming. I mean, I think the very first thing that could be considered programming was when I played Roller Coaster Tycoon, and I would run some scripts that people wrote to modify the game to be able to like build way past the limits or build certain coasters underground that you weren't supposed to. And it was really like Age of Empires, Warcraft 3 that I learned to program.
Cool. Tell me about the modding community. I've never modded games.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure it's quite a bit different now than back then. Back then, forums were really, really popular. There was no Reddit. This was actually pre-Google in the early days, or maybe Google was just like a super small thing. No Reddit, like no Discord. So forums and IRC were basically what I used. And
cool.
Forums are, for people who haven't really used them, they're basically like discussion boards. It's kind of like Reddit, but less about the upvotes and more just like a bulletin board, and you see kind of the most recent posts rather than the most popular posts. I would like ask for so much help on basically everything because I didn't know anything starting out, and I got really good at like online communications, and ended up being like an admin of several of the large Warcraft 3 communities, and I think that gave me a heart for community management and like just the joy of being part of a well-run community and the pain
Mm-hmm.
of when a community was not well run. Enough by myself. Like, yeah, definitely gave me a heart for communities. It's really cool though. I mean, I think what maybe makes the press is, examples of harassment and toxicity, which are totally, totally problematic. Don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of really cool ways that people are blessed by online communities, and I'm pretty passionate about trying to have those outweigh the bad apples.
Yeah, Pixel Pug, my little studio, that's kind of the vision that God's given us, is just to create community. Mm-hmm. So I'd really like to just pause here a minute and talk about your community building experience and what you've seen and what makes a healthy community.
That's definitely a good question. So I think there's definitely a lot to unpack there. I think probably one of the biggest lessons I learned along the way was building a good team is so essential. Like you can kind of be the, I don't know, benevolent dictator model up to like a certain amount of people, but after that point, it becomes unsustainable. And also, it's really hard to make the right decision if you're emotionally involved. So, for example, if someone's toxicity is like specifically directed at you as an individual, it can be tough to not maybe like disproportionately react to it. So yeah, I think having a team of people who can like kind of provide some checks and balances for yourself and also just support you is really important. Going along with that, I think having a clear sense of vision and rules is important because everybody has their own individual kind of beliefs and tolerances for what feels kind of acceptable versus not acceptable. I think like everybody's generally aligned on things like, spam and, all that stuff is bad, but then it's most of moderation and community management boils down to a gray area and how to decide what to do in those circumstances. And since it varies per individual, I think having kind of clearly defined rules and vision for what the community is supposed to be is important so that individuals don't just like kind of make decisions from their own individual judgment. Because we definitely had circumstances where that happened, and lots of learning experiences along the way. Lots of other things, but those are just a couple maybe tangible examples.
Yeah. How big is your community right now?
So I guess the community is sort of split across like Discord and Reddit as the main ones.
Okay.
Reddit, we only started really paying attention to maybe like a year and a half ago or something. So that's quite a bit smaller. There's probably like 6,000 members there, but it's slowly been picking up activity. The Discord is like 30 or 35,000 members now, something like that. Wow. And it's been pretty much organic growth. Like we actually had a Slack channel before Discord, and that was kind of funny because like gamers are like, why are we in Slack? Like that's for work. And then eventually like someone was like, dude, you should use Discord. And then we actually were pretty hands off on the Discord almost from the start. And then we got a little bit more involved to take it from feeling like just a kind of unorganized single channel to kind of putting some structure around it. And then now we have a pretty good moderation team, and then like a community helper team below that. They pretty much handle everything. We have community staff that run monthly cash tournaments called the Nova Cups, which I think at one point we were having like 300 participants every time. It might be down to like a couple hundred, 200 now, but it's still a pretty big event. Streamed on Twitch and so on, and it's really cool. It's all community run, and it's just so much more sustainable than the early days when we were kind of doing everything ourselves.
With a community that size, I'm curious about your team. Like, how big is the like community management side?
So right now, there's one cool thing with the NinjaKiwi acquisition in the future. We're definitely hoping to hire a community manager, at least part time, if not full time, because we've felt a little stretched thin between my business partner Julian and I. So our moderation team's probably maybe like 6 or 7, maybe 6 active people probably, and they're the ones that are kind of making the final call on rules or infractions or things like that. And then we have what are called community helpers. We probably have like 30 of them or so. So those ones are not moderators, like they can't actually like kick or ban people, but they are kind of just prominent, active community members that generally seem pretty helpful. So there's a little bit more, like, I don't want to say like a lower bar, but kind of like we don't really. It's fine if they kind of disagree with us quite a bit on certain things. It's just like if they're doing a lot for the game and we like value their opinion and stuff, then we'll usually invite them to be a community helper. So they're kind of the first line. Like they're usually the ones that answer when people have questions and things like that. And then moderators are usually called more in when something needs to be done. But yeah, that's pretty much been what we've needed for a while. And then Reddit's kind of a little bit of the Wild West, but it kind of polices itself. We have maybe just like a couple moderators for that.
Running a community is a lot of work. What are some cool things that have come out of it?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big ones is the tournament thing, like I mentioned. Like we have somebody who casts the tournaments every month, and then he gets like, so we basically gave him almost no guidance. We're just like, hey, like just talk about the game and like entertain people. And then he's got one and gone things like he's gotten guest co-casters with him pretty much every single month. Actually, last March, or maybe it was March, not April. Yeah, March. He actually got a League of Legends pro caster, like someone who does esports for League of Legends. I think one of the European casters co-casted with him for our game. And it was really cool seeing like this guy who like you can look up calling League highlights, kind of doing the same for Legion TD. And he's a high level player in Legion actually himself. He's like a top 1% player in Legion. So it's been really cool connecting with people like that with just through the community. Other cool things are we have a publicly available API to develop apps for Legion TD2. So people, people have made like ways to like look up your profile or leaderboards outside the game. But then also they've gone beyond and taken a lot of the game data and crunched like win rate numbers or like different graphs and like trends of what characters seem to be popular or like winning a lot, and kind of like using data in really cool ways to talk about the game. And we just basically we're like, hey, here's the data, here's the tools. Wish we had the bandwidth to give you more guidance, but if you're able to figure it out, here it is. Some people have even like modded the game actually, which is kind of cool. Feels like it's going like full circle. Like they've made custom UIs and things for the game, which is cool.
Do you have mods support in then?
No, so they're basically
like was that a planned thing?
Hacking the game. Like they're kind of like some of them have been like, I feel kind of guilty doing this, but we're on like really good terms with the people who are doing the modding. So sometimes they'll like ask me like, is it okay if I'm doing this? And I'm generally, as long as they're not using it for any like gameplay advantage, generally just fine with it. I mean, I still feel like a modder. It's really cool. It's hard to discuss the cool parts without getting into game specifics, but it's mostly just user interface tweaks and updates. Since the game the gameplay is run on a remote game server, whereas the client running on your computer is usually just kind of for rendering and UI.
Okay.
So they can't really modify gameplay even if they wanted to. The only place it gets like slightly sketchy was where there was information available to your computer, like information available to the player, but what was intentionally obscured a little bit, and then the modders would sometimes. So to put it in concrete terms, every unit has like a gold value, and if you scout your opponent, you can kind of see at a glance what they're doing. But unless you were like insanely fast at calculating, you couldn't see exactly how much, like the amount of gold they had spent on all their. Oops, sorry, this light likes to shut off. You couldn't see the exact amount of gold they had spent on their army, which would knowing that exact number kind of informs your strategy. So the way what we ended up doing is we ended up just exposing that number, like making that number available for everybody. Because we're like, we're not going to win the battle here. Let's just let everybody know that number. But that's probably the closest. And even that gives you like a very minuscule advantage. So it wasn't really a big deal. But yeah, those are some examples. Otherwise it's just been super cool seeing people stream the game, seeing people have stories like husband and wife, like a husband was like deployed overseas and like he would play with his wife like every weekend or something, and just like seeing how it brought people together, or like a son and his dad would play together, or even actually Jamie Harris, who I met through Imladris, he's the founder and kind of director of Satellite Gaming. He played Legion TD2 before I met him with one of the students he was ministering to. And that was kind of like their activity together. So it's super cool. I always take so much joy in the individual stories. There's one more where someone asked me for permission to play the Legion TD2 victory music at his wedding, I think, the wedding ceremony, like when
that's cool.
when guests were coming to get seated. And then he showed me a video later of like them actually doing it. That was like incredibly cool.
Wow, that's pretty special right there.
Yeah.
So how do you go from high school modding to Legion TD2? Because Legion TD2 is in Unity, right?
So Legion TD2 is in Unity, the client, and then the game server is C#, just a standalone executable. And
then did you go to help me fill in the timeline here? Did you go to college?
Yeah, so I went to college between Legion TD. I did senior year of high school, and then I went to college, studied programming. I actually open sourced Legion TD, the mod, end of my freshman year, I think. I just kind of ran out of time to keep up with it, and also kind of wanted to. Actually, there's sort of a longer story behind that. I was kind of running out of time, but also wanting to kind of surrender that area of my life to God, and just kind of focus on not only college, but just kind of friendships and being present in person, and rather than kind of being fully identified by my online persona. So I actually, open source Legion TD. Didn't really do a whole lot with it for three and a half years, and then started Legion TD2 about a year after graduating college, when I was kind of like, okay, I've kind of done life without games for a while, and I kind of feel like I'm games is where I'm supposed to be. So that was kind of when I started. College was definitely helpful for building a lot of fundamentals of programming. They didn't actually teach C# or anything like that, so it was a lot of learning. I rewrote the code like 3 times.
So I want to touch on something you just said. It sounds like your online identity kind of defined you. Is that how? I
think for a little bit, I mean, because the original mod was played by probably like 1 million people or some crazy amount, and
wow.
for a 18-year-old, that's kind of a lot to kind of process, especially. So I'm like the middle child of three, two, so older brother, younger brother. Kind of was always in middle school and high school, kind of felt a little bit like I was in the background. So I was always kind of just on my computer doing my own thing, while my older brother was getting all the college attention, like college applying attention, that kind of thing. And then younger brother was cute and stuff. So, so yeah, just having that much attention, it was kind of tough to know what to do with it. And then maybe in college, it was I want to be like well liked and respected in college, so I would kind of try to mention that I have this really cool mod, and like that was kind of what maybe people remembered me as in my freshman year. Like that was, you're trying to like meet as many people as you can, and you kind of remember one or two things about them, and that was kind of what people remembered about me. But yeah, I think in hindsight, I'm super glad I kind of took a little bit of a break during college.
So where was your faith? Did you grow up like is your family believers?
So I grew up Catholic, and so we were going to church every week. I think it was kind of more of a cultural thing for me. I wasn't like sort of against it, but also didn't feel like it was something that's supposed to kind of change my life a whole lot. So it wasn't until I think freshman year of college where I started to take my faith more seriously. I think the difference too was back home, I didn't really have friends at church. I think it was kind of just like my parents and kind of their friends. And I grew up in Florida, so it was like definitely a lot of old people too. So I was like, churches were just lots of old people. And whereas in college, I stumbled upon a Christian fellowship playing Frisbee and having free pizza. Got to know some of them. Got to see some of them were actually really, really brilliant people. And some of them were like PhD students or master's students or otherwise, I mean, they were at UC Berkeley for a reason, but also taking their faith really seriously. And that was a combination I hadn't really seen before. And yeah, I think that just kind of unlocked my mind to be like, oh, like maybe like Christianity is like, it's even an option on the table. Like at that point time, I was like, oh, maybe it's not really like a good option, but it's an option. And, yeah, I think that was such a crucial step to me because I feel like the gospel and the word of God is compelling on its own. Like I don't need to, I don't know, try to retell it in a better way necessarily. But then someone also has to have like they also have to actually like listen or give it a chance. So one way, and it was kind of a non-starter for me, not knowing any Christians that I kind of admired from a kind of intellectual level until this freshman year experience. So I kind of feel like one way God's been calling me through my career is just to be very excellent at what I do, and so that other people can see like, oh, here's a guy who's really good at what he does. He makes really good games. Like he's also a Christian. Like those two can exist, and maybe that makes investigating Christianity no longer a non-starter for some people, and that's kind of one way. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a way where I feel like my faith intersects with my career. Even if I'm not putting Bible verses in the loading screen, it's like which I may or may not have done in some versions of Legion TD. Little known fact, it was pretty semi-transparent, so no one really knew except unless you pointed it out. But yeah, I think that's kind of one way I've thought called, especially for the upcoming game.
I'm curious, what else has God taught you along this journey? I know that it's been hard, as we talked a little bit about in the beginning.
Yeah, so I think I think a big part personally has just been being able to kind of like live my life with uncertainty. I think
Mm.
has been a big lesson for me. Like I mentioned early on, I kind of just had a vision and passion and not much else going for me at the start, um, but just kind of persisted and eventually kind of made it to the finish line. I think my tendency is to kind of want to plan as much as I can, and like my wife knows this. Like I like to plan for contingencies, kind of to a fault. Um, I think in the Bible it says like we've even our best laid plans can go awry in the blink of an eye. And I think with Legion TD2, it's been such a lesson in kind of just uh, taking things one step at a time. I think a big example. So aside from the example of open sourcing Legion TD, which was really scary because it's like here's this thing I built up, and like I knew that like when you open source something to like a bunch of other 14-year-old kids, the first thing they're going to do is delete your name, put their name, and that's exactly what happened. So so actually for a number of years, like people like it was funny. There was like some years where like people didn't really believe me when I said I made Legion TD. They're like, no, like the name in the loading screen is like this other guy. And I was like, yeah, like he deleted my name. And they're like, okay, cool, sure, whatever. Eventually it kind of came full circle once people dug deeper, but that was kind of funny. Like seeing something like that's very much yours, like feel like no longer yours, I think was kind of a cool, like that's where it feels like an idea really has legs is when or a creation really has legs is when it's like no longer your own. So yeah, that was a big step. Another big step was so after launching the game in early access in 2017, the game had kind of a rocky launch. Like it sold a good amount of copies, probably just because of the reputation of the name and such. But there were a lot of like server issues that were mainly my fault, and then kind of just issues with the game. The review score was like 20% for a little while. Obviously not very good on Steam. I think, but like it made a decent amount of money just because it's an upfront $19.99 purchase. So again, at this point, the kind of fiscally smart thing to do would be take the money and run. But we stuck with it. We just we're like we're gonna re-release the game. It was in early access, so we still kind of felt like we had a redo. Like we'll full release the game. We're like we'll do it in a year, or hopefully less, but maybe a year. And it ended up taking 4 more years to get to full release, during which we basically paid ourselves almost nothing and actually cut off our paychecks at one point. And the game was dwindling in player base the whole time. Like for early access launch week, I think it peaked at like 3,500 or something, which is pretty good for like a small indie game. But then like every month it was like being cut in half or something. And at one point I was just in 2019, October 2019, I remember just at night being in tears because all I wanted to do was like play the game. And there's like 27 people online, and since it's a skill-based matchmaking game, the system like tries to find a fair match for you, and it'll wait if it can't. And I just waited for like 20 minutes, and like it couldn't match me with anybody. And I was like I guess this is it. Like we had been working full time on it for like 2 years of early access at that point, and I don't know, none of the bets kind of seemed to be paying off. And yeah, I was in tears, I think. But for some reason, I just knew it wasn't time to give up. And we kind of still kept at it. And even if we couldn't see where it was going, during that time too, I actually co-led, well, I was more the assistant person, but co-led a mission trip team to Japan, actually with my wife. And it was kind of like, it felt weird because I was like, gosh, I'm like struggling so much with work to even like have a livable salary. And like, and my wife wants me, we weren't married at the time, but she wants me to like help lead this mission trip, which will obviously take up a bunch of time from work. But like I shared it with my team, and they were like super supportive. They're not believers, but they know how much my faith means to me. So having their support and like kind of just doing that in the midst of all this was a pretty formative experience for me. And I think, yeah, and it's one of those things like I think it was 2 weeks. It like felt like an eternity in the moment, but then in the grand scheme of things, like, you know, when you're talking about like 10 years, like it's not that much. Yeah. So I think just the whole early access period and working towards something kind of at a short-term loss, was kind of just a good experience for me, and like knowing why I'm doing this. Like I just want to make the best game I can make and not really in it for the money. Thankfully it actually did work out for me in terms of when we full released the game in 2021. That's really where it took off. So I think, not that this will happen every time, but I think it was kind of cool, just seeing our efforts pay off there. So yeah, I think just even moving forward, thinking about where like I might be moving later this year, and like all sorts of other things, like do we want to have a second kid, like all these things. There's all these uncertainties, I think, but I'm like kind of okay with it. It's just kind of, that's how life on Earth is.
Yeah, I'm finding that out just more and more. How much is outside of my control? How much is God's own plans that He has for me and stuff. I've had to, over the last several years, I've felt like I've kind of had to lay things down and just find peace in God and in the midst of the unknowns.
So. Totally.
What's it mean to you to be a Christian game developer?
Yeah, so that's a question I've tried to give a little bit more thought to this year. It's tricky because I actually have not thought that much about what it means to be a game developer in general. I think some people get into the industry like having this idea of themselves, you know, what kind of game developer do I want to be, and so on. Almost like a brand for themselves or whatever. I think the way I got into the industry, I guess, is it's like I just had this specific game I wanted to make, and I would do whatever it took to make that product. So I didn't even really see an identity for myself. So I think this year I'm starting to give that a little bit more thought. But I wish I had a more clear answer. I think in terms of being a game developer who's Christian, I think a little bit of what I shared earlier was kind of, I think by living my life in the way that my faith is present in my day-to-day interactions, and as well as excelling in what I do as a game developer. To me, that's kind of where I feel called to right now. I know there's some Christian game developers who are kind of making more outwardly Christian games, but I currently don't feel called to that. Yeah, it's tough though. I think in terms of just running my company though, we've always tried to value kind of the health of the team over the, I don't know, meeting deadlines or shipping a feature or whatever, and kind of always or never losing track of kind of the humans behind the game. And that's something that I think is maybe not the case at some other companies, maybe especially larger companies. Sure. So that's, I think, just being consistent with my values is sort of how I try to distinguish myself as a game developer.
Yeah, that's good. I'm curious just to pick your thoughts on just the industry right now. Obviously, there's a lot of up and down with jobs and stuff, but it's also at the same time, it feels like it's harder and harder to just get visibility. More and more games are getting put out. I'm curious, like you, obviously you have an established brand and people know, but like, are you thinking about things any differently now than from when you started?
Not really, actually. I
Okay.
think maybe to a fault. I've usually kind of tuned out industry trends.
Hmm.
Um, I think again, like I got into the industry wanting to make a specific game, and kind of to a fault, no one can tell me otherwise. um, like I think when I started in 2014, 2015, there were kind of some people who were like, "Oh, PC is a dying platform. Like you got to go mobile." And I mean, they are correct in that mobile's huge and bigger, but they were kind of incorrect in that piece. Like I don't think PC is going anywhere. Um, and then others were like, "Oh, you gotta be mobile, like free to play, pretty much, or like you got to make a MOBA or something back in 2014." And then maybe in 20, whenever Fortnite got huge, it was like, "Oh, you got to make like a battle royale or whatever." And then it's like, "Oh, you have to like use AI or like you have to use VR or whatever." I think I got a little bit calloused to some of these kind of like industry trends, and
Hmm.
just want to make the game that I know I want to make. And I think there's enough of an audience that overlaps with my personal kind of dream games that it'll be financially fine. In terms of like the kind of the layoffs and the I don't know shrinking or whatever they call it, it's kind of tough to say because my team's so small and the way um, even NinjaKiwi like given that what they're outputting and given they've been around since like 2000 I don't know 6 or something 2000 like 15 plus years, they're still like fairly small for compared to what they
Hmm.
could be. So I think we haven't been like super personally affected by it. Yeah, like I mean, I'll just see like graphs of like anytime I see a graph and there's like a double digit billion number there, I'm like I don't even know how to relate to this. Like, um, yeah, I guess the only other takeaway for me is like once I start hiring people later this year and next year, there'll be a pretty big pool. Um, yeah, I mean, otherwise it's definitely like commiserating with friends I have in the industry that were affected by layoffs, and like it's definitely a tough situation. And I don't want to detract from that, but I think in terms of like, do I alter the like strategy or vision of our company based off of trends? Probably not.
If a student was to come to you seeking advice, what would you tell them?
So with advice, I always think like context matters. So
Sure. Okay.
it's pretty impossible to like give blanket
Hmm.
advice.
Okay. What about okay?
I
What if some students that are graduating college here and thinking about either going indie or trying to work for a company or kind of weighing their different options, like should they
Mhm.
launch out and start trying to make their dream game like you did, or should they go work for somebody for a while?
Yeah. So that one's a tough one because like it depends on so many factors, like so many circumstances, like what risks you're willing to take and like what vision you have. Like for example, if it's someone who kind of likes the idea of being indie but doesn't really know what they want to make, versus like someone who's like, I absolutely want to make a game about bug hunting for my kid. It needs to kind of look like this, like needs to play like this, and like nobody else will make this game. And
Mm-hmm.
then for someone like that, I might be like you probably just want to go indie so that you can make exactly what you want to make. Whereas the other person, I might be like maybe it could be useful to get some industry experience first. I don't know. Or I think if I had to just give one kind of soundbite random advice, I think it'll be like something along the lines of like it's good to read a lot of advice, but like be okay with kind of saying no to things or like just ignoring
Mm-hmm.
advice. I think these days there's just a massive amount of information out there between like YouTube and articles and like blogs, and a lot of them are well-intentioned, very educational, and generally like there's a lot of truth to a lot of them. But it's like, I don't know, you can't like please everybody. You can't like follow every good practice. Like a lot of them like conflict with each other too. So sometimes it's just like logically impossible to do everything that you read. Or you just spread yourself too thin trying to do like, I don't know, every good practice. Or even just like people in your life have given you, again, well-intentioned advice to do this or that, or not do this or not do that. I think if there's one takeaway from my story, it's like it's okay to, you know, like don't just try to please everybody. I think it's probably one thing. Like there's absolutely no way I would have done what I did if I followed all the advice I was given, or even half the advice. So kind of if you have a strong vision, strong belief, like take in as much advice as you can. Like it's always good to have data points and sanity check yourself and check your blind spots. But when it comes to making a decision for yourself, like don't outsource that to like a YouTube video.
If your game hadn't have worked, would you still be making games? Would you stayed in the industry?
That's a tough question. I think I would. I think I would. I think I've toyed around with the idea, kind of during the early access days. I toyed around with the idea of having like a non-gaming job and then do games at night. But now, or after having gotten married to a non-gamer and then having a kid who's currently a non-gamer but maybe a future gamer, I think the idea of doing work after hours is like kind of not a possibility anymore. So I think I'd still be doing games. I think there's nothing quite like the experience of working really hard to craft an experience and then having someone enjoy that and just seeing them laugh on Twitch. There was a long time ago, before game design, I wanted to make roller coasters for people. And then I kind of quickly realized that's not just like a one person kind of like thing you just do. And then I realized games would give me that experience. But yeah, the idea of crafting something, basically roller coasters and Disney rides and things, and then seeing people have joy from them. That was where my childhood dream was. And then games are kind of the same thing, just in an easier medium.
How did you get connected with Imladris?
So at GDC, not CGDC, regular GDC in 2016, I had attended there just as an attendee. I was just walking around the expo floor and saw Soma Games' booth there. I think they were just showing off G Prime. I don't think they were showing off anything Redwall related. But then I met Chris Skaggs there at the expo floor, and then we hit it off pretty quick. As soon as he mentioned the word Redwall, I was like super hooked because I've read like 21 of the 22 books. I'm like too afraid to read the last one, knowing that the author died. And like, I don't know, for some reason, me and a friend of mine, actually, we both read 21 out of the 22. And then I think it's 22 books. So yeah, we hit it off, and then pretty quickly found out we're both Christians, hit it off even more. And then he backed our Kickstarter, which meant a lot because I was like, it was pretty clear that Legion TD2 was not his, competitive multiplayer, pretty hardcore game was like not his normal game of choice. But then he and someone believed in us enough to give a pretty significant Kickstarter backing. Awesome. And our Kickstarter looked like pretty janky compared to what we have now. I got to show you links after the call, but this did not look like it was going to, make a ton of money. So, yeah, it meant a ton. Like that was like a really rare, like it was just like, I think that's a case I look back on where like money can be used to bless others. Like it's just, you can say all the kind words you want, and that means a lot too. But then when you like kind of show it with money, and especially like given that we just met and like I think he backed it that week or something, and then it's just like an action that stuck with me for a long time and was like kind of just the radical generosity that affected me. Another one actually was a friend of mine who was like a missionary and I forget which country, like Ghana or something, and obviously living on missionary budget, like very much not a gamer. And she backed it for like $50, and that meant like the world. Yeah, so that was where I met Chris, and then later, like 3 years later, 2 years later, I realized we were living like an hour and a half away. Or maybe he realized. I was living in California when we met, so we were like, I don't know when we'll cross paths. And it turns out I moved to Oregon like 2 years later, and so we crossed paths. Yeah, we just kept in touch that way, and it's been super cool being part of Imladris. I actually drove up to visit Soma's office, I think in the fall or summer last year, which was really cool. And yeah, it's been, especially with my company being remote and on different time zones. So my partner's in Korea, my employee's in Germany right now, and NinjaKiwi's in New Zealand. So Imladris has been a really cool community for me for kind of people who are actually awake at the same time, and like I can get some real time interactions with. It's been a really cool space, and I love so many of the people there, and it's such a blessing to be a part of.
Yeah, it is. So you're speaking at CGDC this summer. Mm-hmm. Do you know what you're going to talk about?
I mean, I just feel like I got the details yesterday, but I mean, it sounds like we're going to be talking about kind of the unity that we have as Christians who are game developers, despite coming from such different walks of life and working on very different games. So yeah, I'll probably share some of what I shared in this podcast, I think. And to me, it feels most natural to share from personal experience, since it's kind of like I can just say what I think happened to me, and people can kind of do with that as they will. I haven't been a particularly introspective person in terms of like my identity as a game developer. So as I mentioned earlier, so it's like I don't know how much I have to say on that. I think I'll probably just share kind of my story, and it's probably something kind of unique to me is being able to say I worked on the same game for like 10 years and as kind of the founder director of it. I want to just share some stories, some of the ones I already shared, and maybe a few others. Probably put a lot of visuals too. I want to share like people see like a pretty polished game out there now, but like I want to share like the early days, like when I was sketching on I'm not an artist, but we didn't have an artist, so I did a lot of sketching. Like I remember like either the DMV or like waiting for my car to get service or something, like sketching characters, and then like I think me and my wife were like babysitting for somebody, and I was sketching stuff over there. And these look like classroom doodles from like a third grader or something. I don't know. Third graders are pretty good, more like first graders or something. And then some of them became the characters that people know and love today. So I want to show definitely some of the early day stuff and kind of the struggles, and just like, I think I want to communicate that I didn't have this figured out until, I mean, I still feel like imposter syndrome a lot of the times, but it's like definitely didn't know what I was doing in the start.
That's surprising to me that you feel like you have imposter syndrome.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like with my code, like I follow like some best practices of code and I violate many others. So, but my game still runs, right? So
yeah.
It's one of those things. Even like the same advice applies. Like it's really good to read up and be familiar with best practices. Good to follow them when you can, and but have some like leeway with yourself, and it's not always going to be textbook. So
Well, I am really looking forward to getting to hang out with you this summer and looking forward to your talk. Um, before we go, where can people connect with you and find your games?
So Legion TD2, you can either Google it or go to legiontd2.com, and it's on Steam. Um, Otherwise, if you Google my name on LinkedIn, always happy to connect there, Brent Batas. Um, and then Discord, if you join the Legion TD2 Discord, my name's at the top. It's Lisk, Lisk. You can always connect with me there. Otherwise, yeah, I think between those, you can probably get in touch with me.
And we'll provide links in the show notes and stuff so people can connect.
Cool.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for talking. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Brock. It's been really awesome to share. It's super cool.